like to pop this guy out of the retainer here to give more room to snake this tray out. Something like that. There's a little hook. You gotta pry the hook that way, and then you pull the pin up like that. This will pull out, and this should disconnect here. That can be moved later, or it can be removed completely once the mount's gone. This obviously just lifts out. As with prior generations, there's a missing tooth on this counterweight or shift linkage. It's right there. You'll see better on your car. You can use a generic battery post terminal puller to disconnect or pull off this linkage. Just hook in underneath it and then start tightening. And as you're tightening, the linkage will pull off of the selector shaft. You have to get at that one with a deep socket. Use an air ratchet, power tool, up to you. And once it's loose, I usually just tie it up out of the way, something like that, or over here. Just like hanging a brake caliper, use whatever works for you. Metal hook, bungee cord, zip ties. $18. Hello, baby. Battery positive goes down to the starter. Battery negative is right here. You can tie things together out of the way. To disconnect connectors with the red pull tab, you got to pull on the tab first. Sometimes they break. In this case, it's coming off already. Just slide the battery cover, the plastic cover off of the battery cable. 13. Once it's off, put the nut back on the starter so you don't lose it. Same thing with this one, just tuck it out of the way. All these other connectors as well. There's a backup light switch. You have to disconnect the clutch slave cylinder. You're going to get fluid coming out or pumping out. It routes along the side here. It's connected against the chassis and plastic holders. You might want to opt to disconnect it right at the firewall as well. Up to you which way you want to go. Pull up on the metal retaining clip. If you can get to it. It should stay in the unlocked position. Place a rag under there just to catch some brake fluid. What I usually do afterwards is I hose the area down with water. Okay, this fitting should come out. What you can do is you can take an earplug and stick that in there, and that slows the leak down a bit. Same thing on this side. Carefully lift it out of its retaining bracket. Here's that. Lift up on the retaining clip until it clicks into place. Pull it off of the slave cylinder. Put an earpiece in there. Now you should be able to finagle this thing out. Just be careful. There's obviously a bit of brake fluid that might drip out. Once it's out, you want to make sure that the O-ring is still on it or in place. This side doesn't have an O-ring, but the slave cylinder that goes in does. If the O-ring is missing, then it'll obviously leak. Okay, the slave cylinder side, as you can see, has an O-ring. Just find a generic cover to put on it. Later on that might pop out as you try to lift out the transmission. The slave cylinder might get pushed and then you're going to get fluid coming out, so you got to be careful with that. Okay, I think we got most everything from the top. We'll get this starter bolt, the rest from underneath. Disconnect this harness. That might actually come off with the bracket from underneath, so that's fine, that can stay. Some of this wiring can stay in that bracket. That's also 18. At this point I could probably put the support brace on already, but I'm going to hold off on that. That one's already popped out. That's too long. That's what she said. That one's also popped out. That one's popped out. Looks like it's broken. I took the wrong one off. Why didn't you guys tell me? So you can see how little clearance there is here. What I sometimes do is or what I probably will do here, is take the radiator fans out. That'll give me about that much more clearance, because the engine's going to want to have to come this way a bit to create room on this side. There's a starter, so we're going to continue with the starter, taking that off. There's the bracket that I was talking about that can stay in place with all this wiring. We just move that over a little bit. I might actually even remove the intake snorkel, but sometimes they're just a pain, and it'll probably be fine if I just leave this in place. Just move the bracket off of here. The reason I don't use the ratchet to break it loose, or the air ratchet to break it loose, is because I stripped teeth on it that way last time, and that's why I had to get it serviced. And maybe this bracket will be in the way later when I'm trying to pull the transmission, so I might as well remove this guy. Basically push in on the little knob here, and that pushes past the bracket, and then you can slide it. Here there's a little detent, so you lift the detent and then pull on it. Or just leave it and take just the wire out. Sometimes they make things more complicated than they need be. So that can come with it, no problem. This is going to come out. Use a trim panel tool. And the bottom half, same thing. You just push on the little knob in the middle. should have done this while it was mounted, because I have nothing to hold counter pressure, if you know what I mean. So it is sliding already though. And so that's the bracket that was mounted to the starter right here. And you can see there's a little bit more room now. No worries about the bracket interfering with the transmission. That's a little bit of brake fluid when I disconnected the clutch hydraulic line. And like I said earlier, what I'm going to do later, once it's all back together, I just take some water and I rinse the whole area with water. Water, as Chris Fix would say, water. There's lots of jobs that I have not done often enough to develop a good routine of, you know, step by step what to do first. So I usually just go along as I go. I know Flat Rate Master mentioned you don't want to lift or raise or lower the hoist unnecessarily. I'm not on flat rate, so it really doesn't matter to me as long as I finish the car in the time that the boss said or quoted the customer. Having said that, even if I go over a little bit, no big deal. We make it up other days. I might have to get somebody to stand on the brakes for me to hold all of this. Nope, lucky guy. The inner CV joint bolts are M10. Last one won't go in because of the clamp here, so I have to use a different one. This one's a little bit longer. You can leave the bolts in the CV joint, or you can take them out. They might fall out on you anyways as you're taking the shaft out. It's moving. Forgot to show you guys how to remove a bolt. Sometimes it's easier to get at the inner bolts from underneath. Same thing, you can leave the bolts in place or you can just remove them. Don't worry, I use brake clean to wash everything down afterwards. It'll be nice and dry, no oil contamination. These ball joints are 16, sometimes the studs break. You don't really have to worry about alignment because the hole is just the size of the stud. These came off nice. Looks like that ball joint was replaced before. And you can lower the control arm, push the caliper out, and then the drive shaft should come out nicely. You can also already check if the drive shaft is loose, which it is. It's a boy. Same thing on this side. Oh, it's coming, sorry. I thought it was stuck. It's okay, I got it. It's another boy, big boy. Yeah, gotta show you guys me lubing up this side. As you can see, this side's drying nicely, taking all the oil with it. Okay, then I usually take this guy out. That's a couple of 16s, and I think that's a 21 or 22. It's 21. 16. Okay, that's almost got her. So radiator fans, and maybe I will take this charge pipe out once the fans are out of the way. At this point I can also tilt it. You can see that gives me more room to slide it down. Then here's another one of those red connectors. You want to move the red piece first, and then you can lever or push down on it, and that should free up this black piece, and then you can slide the connector off. And they too sometimes stick pretty good. So again, this is just my personal preference, removing a few extra pieces just to give me as much room as possible. Those should be T25s, Torx 25. Radiator fan shroud should be T30s. Feel free to use electric ratchet, whatever you have. Milwaukee is not sold in Canada. Okay, that leaves two at the bottom. I'm going to take that intake hose nut off here, and then down here where it mounts to the block, T30 as well, and one more underneath, and that whole intake will come out. That gives me even more room. 7mm. And these hoses can stick really badly, so you gotta sort of work them loose with a pick. You just go around like this, and that breaks it free. I take these intake pipes off as well. Be careful, there might be some oil that comes out. You just pull the clip until it locks. Two more T30s. This bolt is not going to come all the way out. It's going to stay inside this plastic tube where the bracket is. So you just want to make sure that it's all the way out of the engine block. That's almost there. It should be free. Finish off with the radiator fans. Once they're out of the way, it's easier to get at that last intake bolt. Somebody recently asked me if they can remove the fans pulling up and out instead of lowering them like I do. It's possible. And see, this is where that extra room comes in when you move the engine back a bit. Come on. Okay, now we can get at this bolt here. Don't forget to disconnect the map sensor, the boost pressure sensor. Might have to work blind, work by feel. Somewhere around here. Again, you'll see better, you'll feel better on your car. I'm just providing some generic info. Reading what the service manual says would be the first step. Hey, there might be a plastic zip tie as well. No, there's not. So this thing should come off. Just be careful with the radiator. See, I got oil coming out here. All over my shirt. So we've got all this extra room now to maneuver the engine over. And you should actually be using a floor jack here to position the engine over. What you also want to do is disconnect the exhaust here, because when you let the engine down, this is going to hold it up, which puts tension on the flex. Okay, now I'm ready for my engine brace on the top, and then it's just a matter of removing the lower bolts. Yeah, these are all 18. The upper piece can probably stay. Now these three on the bottom here. slide that mount out, lift it out this way. At this point you can remove this guy. Another final look from the top. Everything's looking good. We can start to lower it a bit. So the only thing that's holding the engine right now on this side is this motor mount, or engine mount. In this transmission there's no vehicle speed sensor for the speedometer needle. The ABS wheel speed sensor, front left, takes care of that. And you want to put a rag somewhere close to that slave cylinder, because if it starts to squirt, you want the rag to catch it. It's so slow.
Don't be slow. I'm not going to take the transmission for half a day.
I know. Thank you.
Just came, boom.
Boom. Yeah. Clutch, dual mass flywheel, 9mm 12 point. M12. Sometimes the flywheels, they seize up, or you can see the part that rotates. Sometimes it seizes in such a way that you can't get at the bolts. Then you have to cut this inner cage off. While it's here, while you have it off, you may want to replace the rear seal. The transmission will come out easier if you remove the passenger side drive shaft flange. You can see here, if the flange comes out to about here, so it would hang up on this sheet metal, and also the flywheel that's in behind. So it's definitely easier if you remove the flange. I should have done that in the beginning. We removed it before installing and it popped right in, the transmission I should say. And now it's just a matter of putting the drive shaft flange back in. There's a 6mm Allen in the middle. You just tighten it down to spec and you're done. This is the one that I'm doing the clutch on. Notice this here, I don't know if it comes across in the camera, but it's all crusty in here. Corrosion. Okay. There was never any complaint about radiator fan operation, but now's the time to take care of this. Or we make a note of it and tell the customer if there's any future issues with radiator fans not working correctly. This is the first place to start. Whichever is more convenient for you. By now you basically know your customer, you know what they're willing to go for. You know which ones complain about extra and which ones don't even ask questions. Just phone me when the car is done, basically. Those customers are few and far between. Best way that I found to bleed the system is to attach a hose to the slave cylinder bleeder and root it into a bottle. open up the bleeder, and then hand pump the pedal all the way to the floor and back, and then make sure that the fluid's always topped up. And I keep doing that, and then tighten the bleeder, and then feel the pedal. It should be solid. If not, bleed it some more, but this is the way I do it. If you were able to remove everything even after watching this video, and you're looking for installation instructions, and I quote, "Installation is in reverse of removal." It really is as simple as that. Sorted.